Penguin Random House Audio presents The Paris Mystery by Kirsty Manning. Read for you by Anthea Greco.
For Sarah James, fearless reporter, inspirational friend. Thank you, X. Also for my very own Charlie, who brings a smile to every setting. I'm going to make everything around me beautiful. That will be my life. Elsie de Wolfe. Prologue. Summer Solstice. Fête de la Saint-Jean. June 1938. The tightrope walker staggered along the high wire as if he were drunk. One slip and he would plummet to certain death. Drums rolled. The orchestra struck opening chords as the elegant hostess, Lady Eleanor Ashworth, stepped into the spotlight, dressed in a black tulle Chanel gown, draped with a cobalt cape. Behind her, the outline of Château de Versailles shimmered in the distance. The hostess raised her hands in the air and dangled a whip from her right fingers. A collective gasp. She teased the audience, circling the whip above her head as the music started to crescendo and the spotlight glowed. Fireworks exploded and screamed into the inky sky. Thousands of colored stars hissed and fell. With a flick of her arm, Lady Ashworth lashed the whip down onto the sawdust, and a dozen miniature ponies wearing sequined headpieces entered the ring, fanning out behind her. On their backs rode burlesque dancers in matching burgundy masks and underbust corsets, their muscular legs braced for balance, bare breasts bouncing. The women in the audience laughed and rolled their eyes at one another, while their menfolk loosened bow ties and leaned forward on the cushions to catch a better view. With the next beat of the drum, the hostess cracked her whip again, and the ponies broke off into pairs and cantered in a pretty circle. 4 stories above, the acrobat leaned forward and dropped onto the high wire, doing the splits. The wire swayed slightly with the gathering wind. The audience cheered. When the acrobat bounced up onto his toes, he spread his arms wide to balance. The wind kicked up and howled, and he disappeared from view as the arena lights blinked out. The orchestra paused, the drum faded. An outraged black swan waddled across from the lake, spread its wings and hissed at the crowd. The mood had shifted with the wind. Chatter faded to nervous whispers. The rhythmic thud of hooves became a panicked patter as the skittish ponies tucked their ears back and whinnied. Guests leaned towards one another in the dark and murmured, "I bet that wasn't part of the party plan." "Mon Dieu, those poor ponies!" "Be a dear and hold my krug." The seasoned hostess needed to soothe her guests. Behind her, trainers could be heard shushing the ponies. The late-night breeze continued its mischief through the gardens of the Villa Trianon, making the red-striped marquees billow and flex, ropes straining against anchor posts. Some of the crystal coupes were blown from their neat rows on tabletops and shattered on the ground. The candles flickered out, and the only light was the bobbing flames on the ends of the tightrope walker's pole as he rushed to the safety of his platform. Someone found the generator, and the spotlight in the main arena flashed back into action. Guests stood clutching cushions and blankets to their chests with one hand, masks and feathered fascinators with the other. Men draped their white tuxedo jackets over the bare shoulders of women. On the main arena, a trainer haplessly tugged at a white pony that reared up on its hind legs, whinnying and tossing its head about. "Music!" Lady Ashworth snapped, clicking her fingers at the conductor. Her neck muscles were as strained as the guy ropes tying down the marquees. The orchestra started up again. As the clarinet and saxophone trilled, a higher note could be heard above the wind. Off pitch. The conductor waved his baton, cutting the music. The other note continued. Nobody spoke. Instead, hands covered mouths as the guests huddled closer together. for it was not music they were listening to. It was a terrifying scream. Chapter 1. Charlie James smoothed her jacket, righted her cloche hat, and slipped on her gloves. Not even the painful squeal of brakes on steel tracks could dim her excitement as the night ferry train pulled into Paris. Gare du Nord spanned as far as the eye could see, and the air was thick with hissing and clacking as trains pulled in and out of platforms. Porters in neat caps struggled to push trolleys loaded with luggage, families huddled in tearful reunions or farewells. Men with booming voices ambled along each platform carrying trays of newspaper cones filled with warm chestnuts, while a young woman with a white chef's hat, a hot plate, and nimble hands produced paper-thin crepes drizzled with lemon and sugar at breakneck speed. Paris. Charlie thought of her former husband's surprise when she'd told him she was leaving Sydney.
That's quite a stretch.
Perhaps. But when she'd heard 6 months ago that the Times needed a new correspondent for their Paris desk, she had sent off her clippings, along with a cover letter and resume in flawless French. 4 months later, she was boarding a vessel for Britain, directly followed by the night ferry train to Paris. A conductor in a neat blue hat opened the carriage door, and Charlie stepped onto the platform and made her way towards a handwritten sign. Charlie James, The Times. She sucked in her breath and allowed a ripple of excitement to run down her spine at the sight of her name next to her new masthead. She had a longed-for byline on one of the most famous newspapers in the world, but to achieve this, she had moved to the other side of the world. Her chest fluttering with homesickness, she wished her parents were here to witness her achievement. Resolved to make the best of her new life, Charlie took a deep breath and allowed her eyes to linger on the sign for a second time. Holding it was a beautiful young woman who looked as though she'd stepped from the pages of Vogue. She was dressed in a blush Chanel boucle suit, kitten heels, and a matching pillbox hat. A cream Hermès handbag dangled nonchalantly on her wrist. Beside her stood a greying, balding, portly gentleman in a crumpled dark suit. Charlie presumed this was her new boss, the head of the Paris bureau, George Roberts.
Charlie?
He scratched the back of his head, face pumice. His voice was deep and very British. Short for Charlotte, she replied as wine barrels were wheeled up the platform.
I can see that.
His voice was a little sharp with frustration. Charlie James. She extended her hand and he shook it. His hand was fleshy, his grip firm and businesslike. He narrowed his eyes slightly and studied her face. Here was a man used to sizing people up quickly.
But your byline?
I would hate for people to read my work differently. Charlie jutted her chin out. Like Louis Mack.
Louis Mack, eh?
Her new boss nodded, but his tawny eyes twinkled with curiosity.
Then you have big shoes to fill. I'll need a solid feature right away. A Paris story to prove to our man in London you are up to this desk.
Understood, sir. Charlie's stomach lurched. She'd been put on notice even before the porters had unloaded her luggage. She'd wanted to be a foreign correspondent ever since her mother had taken her to a Red Cross lunch when she was 10. Over lukewarm chops, peas, and mashed potatoes, the Australian war correspondent Louis Mack had spoken of her adventures in German-occupied Antwerp, where she'd sheltered from bombs in a hotel cellar. A plain, slim woman clad in a simple white linen dress, her dark hair spun into a knot at the top of her head, she'd held the floor with tales of hiding in cellars to escape bombs and running along deserted streets to catch glimpses of enemy troops. To escape Antwerp, she had dressed as a maid, buried her notebooks deep in her luggage, and borrowed a local woman's passport. She'd travelled from Belgium to France and London, then all over Europe after the war, filing features, hunting stories. Big shoes to fill, indeed. Charlie wanted to ask her new bureau chief if he'd ever met Australia's most prolific...
Sample complete. Ready to continue?